Hello, my name is Jacob Whitney, and this summer I did a literature review on SARS-CoV-2, or the virus that causes COVID-19. Let me see
I think
if I can
you
make
could
this
have picked
disappear.
something a little bit more relevant to current events next time.
You're going to be seeing this general shape a lot. That's the virus in several different forms for the next 10 minutes. This is the form that the CDC has picked, but there are lots of other different ones, and they're all equally interesting. So this is what the virus actually looks like under a two-dimensional transmission electron microscope. You can see the spikes that form a crown around the virus, which is actually how the coronavirus got its name, because corona is the Latin word for crown. So if you think about it, the virus that has brought the world to its knees in this global pandemic is known as the crowned virus. Some might say the king of viruses.
Oh, it's mind-blowing, Jacob. It's good.
Now, the purpose of my research was to make all this SARS-CoV-2 research understandable. I'm sure everyone has seen stuff in the media about, COVID's doing this, COVID's doing that, but actually to read the scientific papers that are out there is really hard to do because it can be quite difficult from the language they use. And so by reading it all myself as someone who needs to understand that language from the field I'm going into, as I'll benefit from it, as well as hopefully Hampton-Sydney students will benefit from it, particularly those who do not have a background in STEM and biology. So in order to narrow down the wide range of literature topics on COVID, I decided to focus on 4 separate subjects. First is the origins of SARS-CoV-2. Second is how the virus infects the body. The third, how what treatments are effective, what's available, and what's being researched. And lastly, the public policies that have been implemented to contain the spread of COVID-19. Before I really get into this, though, there is some background information we have to go over. I keep saying SARS-CoV-2. What is that? That's the Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2. That's the virus that causes COVID-19, or Coronavirus Disease 2019, which is the disease that we all know and love. There's something else, ACE2, the angiotensin converting enzyme 2. All you have to know is that that's something that the coronavirus connects to in your cells to infect the people. I'm going to go over that more later. Next, SARS-CoV-2 is part of the beta coronavirus genus, as are SARS and MERS. You may remember SARS, Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, from 02 to 04. That came from the Asian palm civet, and it was a pretty big deal back then. It had a high mortality rate. Luckily, it wasn't nearly as infectious as COVID has become. And MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, that came from camels in Saudi Arabia in 2012. It's still an ongoing problem, but those are both beta coronaviruses, as is SARS, which will also be important later. So the origins of SARS-CoV-2. Bats are known to provide refuge to beta coronaviruses, which includes all the ones I just mentioned, SARS, MERS, and SARS-CoV-2. But I actually wasn't able to find a whole lot of scientific information regarding the origins of SARS-CoV-2. Most of the papers I found would only speculate on it, and what went beyond speculation was only tangentially related, such as the fact that hedgehogs in Europe can carry coronaviruses, which is interesting, but not really related to where COVID came from. What I did find is that COVID-19 likely came from a recombination of a known coronavirus, COVID rat G13. Has a 96% similarity with that coronavirus, but where the other 4% came from, we still don't know. My next subject is how COVID-19 infects the body. It does this through it can do this through a direct and indirect methods. The direct is physical contact, which is where social distancing is important, because if I were to shake your hand and I had virus particles on my hand, they would be transferred to you. But the other major way it can spread is through the airborne route. And this is why masks are so important. SARS-CoV-2 has a spike protein that binds to the ACE2 receptor. This is the spike protein here. And you can see here, this is the SARS coronavirus. this is the spike protein, and here's the ACE2 receptor. All you have to know is that the spike protein is what allows the virus to bind to our cells. And it does this by using this receptor, which is normally used for normal cell function, to put part of its genome, this long squiggly line of stuff, into our cells to replicate. And I'm going to say again, viruses are not alive. For those of you who haven't had a biology class in a couple years, to be considered living, an organism has to be able to reproduce on its own. Viruses cannot do this. They have to use our reproductive systems within our cells to create more viruses. Back to my previous slide. There are two ways it can infect people. Yep. The lasting impacts of COVID-19 and expressing symptoms is unfortunately a growing bank of knowledge. So despite knowing how it infects people and how it affects the body, we don't know the permanent damage that will occur. The ACE2 receptor occurs in the lungs, in the heart, in the kidneys, the colon, a couple other places. And we know that it can damage the lungs. We know that it can damage the colon, but the extent of that is still being researched. Lung infections were the primary focus of much research, but that is slowly switching over to colon research as the intestines are being increasingly recognized as a form of, as a place where the virus can replicate. Interestingly, the fluid within your colon destroys the virus very quickly. So once it's in the colon, it can't easily spread to other things in it, or rather it can spread from cell to cell, but it cannot spread in things that are in the colon. What I'm saying is that if you have the virus and you go to the bathroom, the virus will not be in anything that you excrete. So that's really good for poorer countries that do not have good sanitation. The virus will not be found in their water because someone decided to use their water as a river as a bathroom. But the colon is still a place for the virus to replicate in. Next, current and potential treatments. So treatments can be generally placed into two categories, treating the symptoms and preventing infection. As far as treating the symptoms go, there are a vast array of treatments out there, and I feel like a new one comes onto the web every day, so I'm not going to even try to cover them all. All you have to know is that the symptoms that cause permanent damage are caused by the cytokine storm or intense swelling that is your immune system overreacting to the coronavirus. So when people have lower oxygen intake because of the virus, when they have trouble breathing, that's from the swelling in their lungs from their immune systems. The other treatment, preventing infection, that is the vaccine. There are a lot of vaccines being tested right now. There was a DNA vaccine for a rhesus macaque that came up, have good results. I think they tested some 20 or 30 macaques, which is a very low number as far as having any statistical significance for whether that was accurate or not. But all of the macaques showed resistance to the virus after they were given that vaccine. So I think that we can have hope that maybe there will be a vaccine sometime in the near future. Lastly, the efficacy of public policies. I started my research a week late, and then I took a vacation of 1 week during it, so I'm still a little behind everyone else. I'll be finishing up next week. So I don't have as much research on public policies as I do on the rest of my subjects. But what I do know is that quarantining and social distancing really just don't work by themselves. If you want to have effective prevention of COVID, you need to wear a face mask. Much as I hate to say it, it's what works. I hope you can tell by this graph what I'm saying is true. These three red lines, darkest being of Wuhan, normal red, Italy, and pink, New York City, represent their infection rates as time goes on. You'll notice that Wuhan started immediately with lockdown, and that lockdown caused them to have a slow start to the infection, and then it leveled off fairly quickly and stayed level. I'm not going to say that I completely trust the numbers we're getting from China, but I also think there may be some truth to a complete total lockdown keeping the numbers stable. Italy and the US did not have as much success. In Italy, They had lockdown, but it did not prove as effective. In the US, we had social distancing and stay-at-home orders, and none of those things were effective at stopping the coronavirus in its rise. In these graphs down here, however, you can see that when face masks were implemented in Italy, it's this line, in the US, this one, almost immediately, the projected growth rate of the virus fell off. And so we experienced success by combining face masks with quarantining and social distancing. And so I would say public policies need to make face masks mandatory so long as we don't have a vaccine for the virus or a treatment that works 100% of the time. My conclusions about my research. So as far as the origin of the coronavirus goes, we know that it probably came from bats. We don't know how exactly it was transferred to humans. It may have come from another mammal. It may have come from bats. We simply don't know. But hopefully we'll find out. Infection. The lasting consequences of COVID-19 on survivors of the disease are also unfortunately unknown. We do know that there are long-term effects. You may have, if you have a particularly bad case of COVID, you may not ever recover your normal lung function. So it's important to avoid getting it in the first place. And that's because treatments, we still don't have a vaccine to prevent COVID-19 or a treatment that works 100% of the time, or the one that's even gone through clinical testing and been finished so that we know how much it works. So the best treatment we have is prevention, which leads me to public policy. What works, what doesn't? We know face masks work. We know social distancing with face masks work. We can restart the economy. But if we're going to do that, we need to have everyone wearing face masks and keep social distancing.